Almost 11 years ago, many of us gathered in this very hall for the Not in Our Name Evening of Conscience against the crimes that were begun by the Bush regime. We vowed, let it not be said that people in the United States did nothing when their government declared a war without limit and instituted stark new measures of repression. President Bush has declared you're either with us or against us. Here is our answer. We refuse to allow you to speak for all the American people. We will not give up our right to question. We will not hand over our consciences in return for hollow promises of safety, end quote. Those words bite deep today as the war crimes of the Bush regime have been codified, carried forward, and taken to even more obscene criminal levels by the Obama regime. The Obama regime, which has arrogated to itself the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. They have dramatically expanded on a vengeful police state that viciously targets whistleblowers who have acted on their consciousness to expose injustice. Obama has wielded the Espionage Act of 1917 more than all other administrations combined. Bradley Manning, after months of torture, is caught in a trial with huge stakes that is unbelievably Alice in Wonderland. Julian Assange is surrounded. He's confined within the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and Eric Snowden is in hiding while continuing to bravely speak truth, such as when he exposed with apt ridicule the NSA rationale for their massive surveillance program of everyone sharply posing. So, we can potentially reveal a potential terrorist with the potential to kill fewer Americans than our own police do. Eric Snowden's actions reveal not just the vast repressive technology, but also the power even a single person acting on their conscience can have to challenge and to change the whole political landscape. The reality is that this system daily grinds up humanity, from the killing fields of Afghanistan and Pakistan to the factories in Bangladesh. And all of these depend on people. People are the system's Achilles heel. We here have the responsibility to awaken and arouse that latent power of the people as we confront and challenge authority. But not only authority, we need to challenge the thinking of the people that justifies great crimes in the name of protecting privilege. Privilege that cripples the conscience and the political sights of those who could and should be a part of changing the world. We can and we must do much, yet we can only do so by truthfully challenging the thinking of many people in this country, helping people break free from a framework that leads to complicity with war crimes and to passively accept a massive government dragnet program directed against everyone, total surveillance, in the hands of a government that has repeatedly shown that their repressive power will only be used against the interests of the people. You know, you can always rely on Thomas Friedman from the New York Times to articulate a viewpoint that at one and the same time offers his advice to those who rule on how to best package and carry out their crimes, while offering an alluring, self-centered, pragmatic rationale to liberals and progressives to go along with the program. Friedman excitedly picked up on an awful blog post written by David Simon, the creator of The Wire, which was a show that actually did some good exposure of the war on drugs as a war on the people. Bill Keller of the New York Times was so pleased with Friedman that he repeated the argument in an op-ed a few days later. Their argument is a rationale for complicity. But before getting into this argument, I must appreciate not only Glenn Greenwald's revelations on the NSA scandal, but his comment, and I quote, "If they started a club called Liberal Pundits to defend the national security state, no auditorium in the country would be large enough to accommodate them." Friedman writes, yes, I worry about potential government abuse of privacy from a program designed to prevent another 911, abuse that so far does not appear to have happened. But I worry even more about another 911. After which he goes on to argue why the massive spy program is not nearly so bad as what might happen to his way of life if there is another 911. He concludes, and I quote, imagine how many real restrictions to our beautiful, open society we would tolerate if there was another attack on the scale of 911. Pardon me if I blow the whistle, end quote. Well, fuck you, Friedman. The only talk of pardons we should have is for Bradley Manning. Or for the millions of black and Latino youth ramped up off the streets and in the hallways of the housing projects where they live in this country who are incarcerated or under the control of the prison system in the tens of millions, all in the name of the war on drugs. For 3 decades, this has been nothing short of a slow genocidal war on sections of the people who the system can no longer exploit profitably and who are feared by those in power for their potentially radicalizing effect on the rest of society. Friedman's beautiful way of life does not exist for black, Latino, immigrant, poor, women victimized by a culture of rape and denial of basic reproductive rights. I say face reality and act accordingly, or become a part of it. That's the choice. The logic that defends the war on terror is no different than the logic that defends the war on drugs. Because in its essence, the war on terror is a war to defend and spread empire. What the U.S. is doing overseas, what it does here at home, is about that, nothing else and nothing less. Empire is just a grandiose word to describe the exploitation of the people and the planet. On the face of it, isn't it really a peculiar brand of insanity to argue that to protect our beautiful freedom and way of life, we have to spy on everyone? Just who is going to carry out this benign surveillance for our own good? The FBI, which spied on Martin Luther King, hounding him, attempting to blackmail him, or drive him to suicide? The FBI that set up and murdered members of the Black Panther Party and others in the 60s, and which never stopped disrupting all kinds of social justice movements from the 1980s and 90s right down to today. Should we trust the CIA and the NSA? Will the blood from the people of Guatemala, from Indonesia, to Yemen, Somalia, run deep and wide? And it's something we should ignore only at the price of complicity here and unspeakable horror in countries around the world. Friedman's logic is nothing more than brocade on what Obama argues. Obama seeks to rope in progressive, rational people to empathize with his dilemma as the way to convince them to identify with the imperial death machine that is this country. And enough already of Obama's Hamlet act of agonizing over kill lists every Tuesday, of making difficult choices between privacy and security. And the punch in the gut line of Obama's is that fairy tale deception which people said they would never accept from Bush, which is, trust me. Trust who? Look, the Democratic Party is a party of war criminals, no less than the Republicans. Madeleine Albright, Clinton's Secretary of State, answered point blank that the sanctions against Iraq in the 1990s that resulted in 500,000 children dying said, well, it was worth it. If any other leader said this in any other country, people would recognize this for the advocacy of genocide that it actually is. And such war crimes are not incidental, they're not exceptional in the history and workings of this system, capitalism, imperialism, which requires ever wider and more competitive exploitation of people and the planet. From the founding genocide against the native people here, to the enslavement of Africans, to the support of the genocide against the Palestinian people, to the 1 million people killed in Indonesia in the 1960s with active CIA involvement, this is the essential nature of what the U.S. is and what it does. No oversight can and will regulate that. The driving force of competitive global capitalism is what regulates what any government that enforces this system does and will do. The heart of the argument of 9/11 is that the only choice we have is between Islamic fundamentalism or worldwide capitalism. This is the America First logic of the war on terror that has resulted in just Iraq in more than 100,000 killed, hundreds of thousands more being maimed and sickened, millions who have been displaced from the country now living in refugee camps, and this is the logic, this is the morality of empire. There is a deadly dynamic in the world today that we can and must break out of. Bob Avakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, has described it this way, quote, "What we see in contention here with jihad on the one hand and McWorld McCrusade on the other hand are historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity up against historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system. These two reactionary poles reinforce each other, even while opposing each other. If you side with either one of these outmodeds, you end up strengthening both." End quote. He has emphasized that what we must recognize is that the historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system, and in particular the U.S. imperialist, has done the most damage. Yes, there are reactionary Islamic jihadist forces that pose a threat to the interests of imperialism in strategic parts of the world. And these forces do carry out actions that target innocent civilians. But the U.S. rulers are not waging this war on terror. However they brand it or rebrand it to save lives. The rise of Islamic jihadist forces is in the main a product of and reaction to the very workings of imperialism, to the ways that imperialism has uprooted and devastated the lives and livelihoods of millions, to how imperialism has propped up vicious regimes like Mubarak in Egypt, and to how imperialism has literally sponsored the rise of these very same jihadist forces when it served their perceived interests in Afghanistan in the early years of the war when Afghanistan was at war with the Soviet Union, where the U.S. backed and funded jihadists to go up against the SU. So when a child in Pakistan hears a whirring buzz overhead and fears that she will be the next kid blown to bits, that serves to recruit more jihadists, and then the cycle goes on and on. But these two outmotives must not be. They are not the only choice in the world today. There is indeed a whole other way the world could be through revolution. A revolution for a radically new state power that is concentrated in this Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America that I urge you to check out, where the right to speech, the right to assembly, the right to dissent is far beyond any constitution that has been promulgated anywhere in the world before. And it's part of a radically new state where people could flourish, they'd be empowered, they'd be backed up to abolish all forms of oppression and exploitation around the world, moving forward to a time when state structures as we know them now would be no more. I don't have time tonight to get into all of this, but I want to extend an invitation to you to be true, to carry through on, and to act on the principles that motivated you to come out tonight. And if in acting on this and being true to those principles leads you to come to see that the source of the problem and its solution lies in revolution and communism, do not turn away because it takes you out of your comfort zone. It challenges your cherished beliefs. or because of prejudice or anti-communist slander. Instead, learn more, go to revcom.us, go to Revolution Books, while we act together to stop this madness. And these are not just good ideas. These are not just good ideas that could never be. Do not be cowed by our relatively small numbers tonight. We are acting on big things: the surveillance, the hunger strike at Guantanamo, the continuing wars, that at certain moments, depending on what we and people like us actually do, can move the world. In just the last few weeks, from 50 people defying a bulldozer in Taksim Square in Istanbul, to the still growing protests in Brazil, to the stand of Eric Snowden, which brought us here tonight, we can see how acts of conscience in the interests of the people can, at certain junctures, galvanize and move millions to think and act differently. Those who rule this empire do not have things all sewn up. Their whole system is riven with problems for which they have no answers that would be in the actual interests of humanity. For us, for the people of the world, we have to start by confronting the world as it is. Our morality and our actions must be grounded in the real world, which stands in sharp contrast to the spreading of illusions and the self-serving immorality of those who rule and their defenders like Thomas Friedman. Avakian has put it like this, quote, "There is a place where epistemology and morality meet. There is a place where you have to stand and say, it is not acceptable to refuse to look at something or refuse to believe something because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And it is not acceptable to believe something just because it makes you feel comfortable," end quote. This evening, we are standing with Bradley Manning, with Lynn Stewart, with Edward Snowden. And we're standing with the millions of people around the world who yearn for a world where they can be free of the terror and misery in which these outmoded systems of the world keep them confined. Let's go forward from here and resist together the unconscionable outrages and crimes that are brought down on the people, while we learn and struggle with each other over the causes of all this and what are the solutions. The hour is late, but there is time for courage and there is time for conviction. Let's act together now.